2 weeks ago, in Word of the Week number 73, the episode was called Three Disqualifiers, we looked at Paul writing to Titus about a pernicious influence on the island of Crete. He said that there are some who are insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially from among the group, from the circumcision group or the circumcision party. And the circumcision party was a title that Paul used to describe Jewish Christians who were teaching that salvation came through faith in Jesus plus meticulous law keeping. That Jesus plus gospel was the heart of our conversation. But he referred to them as the circumcision party or group. And today our word of the week is two words. It's circumcision and uncircumcision. So first, let's look at it in English because it makes it very simple for us to see it in English. Circumcision versus uncircumcision. In English, there's clearly a relationship between these two words. One is someone who has experienced this surgical procedure. The other is someone who has not experienced this surgical procedure. But when we look at it in Greek, we'll notice something very significant. Let's take a look. So circumcision is peritome, and uncircumcision is not aperitome as we might expect. Instead, it is acroboustia. So unlike in English, there's no etymological relationship between the word circumcision, peritome, and uncircumcision, acroboustia. Peritome, peri, around, and tome, cutting, a cutting, is literally to encircle something with a view of removing it, of taking it away. So this is a description of the dynamics of the surgical procedure we call circumcision, right? It's to encircle something, to cut around it with the purpose of taking something away. Acroboustia has no relationship to that whatsoever. It's from akros, which means running to a point or running to an end, and the verb buo, which means to bring to a close or to stop up. So in a very literal sense, it's a description of skin that runs to an end of something and forms a closure. This is a literal description of human foreskin, okay, to put it bluntly. So in the Bible, acroboustia is always translated, virtually always translated as uncircumcision, because it would be indelicate to translate it more literally and just say foreskin. But what we're seeing here is that these two words are the distinction between those with foreskin and those without. It's such a fundamental difference in the people groups and the way they live that Paul uses it 19 times. The word acroboustia, uncircumcision, appears 20 times in the New Testament, once in the book of Acts. The rest are all used by Paul, and Paul uses this term, acroboustia, as an umbrella term to describe everyone who is not part of the covenant, everyone who is not Jewish. There are Jewish people, the people who have peritome, who have circumcision, he calls them the circumcision, and then there's everybody else, the acroboustia, who are the people who are not of the circumcision. To put it more bluntly, there's the foreskin people and the no foreskin people. And all of the other stuff that comes with that, the religious practices and beliefs, are boiled down to this distinction because it's very physical, it's a very dramatic difference, and it involves a severe act to separate this group from that group, right? Pretty profound thing. So he uses that term to differentiate between the two groups because it represents, it sums up in this very fine point how different the two groups are. He uses it as a euphemism to lump together all the non-Jews versus the Jews. Now, the thing about euphemisms is for a euphemism to be effective, you have to have a belief that most people who you are going to use it with, when they hear it or when they read it, are going to recognize what it means, right? For the euphemism to be effective, the concept has to be sort of ubiquitous. So if I used a euphemism here with you and said, I gave him the old umbrella, how do you do? You would say to yourself, what is this guy talking about, right? That's not a common term. That's not something that is so clear that I can use it with confidence that you're going to hear it and understand it. The old umbrella, how do you do, doesn't mean anything. But circumcision versus uncircumcision and all that implies makes a very sort of concrete division between the people groups. And Paul believes that. So he uses it because it's going to be recognized. It's going to clearly differentiate the people groups. Let's take a look in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, how he uses them. And this is from the ESV, and I have included our words of the week. Therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision, akrobustia, by what is called the circumcision, paratomes, which is made in the flesh by hands, remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So he says that the uncircumcision group, the akrobustia, the foreskin people, were not a part of the covenant, cut off from Christ, cut off from salvation, with no hope or no God in the world. Wow, right? But now look what he says in the next two verses in 13 and 14. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. So there was a division between the two groups that was a division summed up in the flesh, right? There were the foreskin people and the no foreskin people. There were the uncircumcision and the circumcision. But now Paul says in Christ, he's torn down that division in his flesh. The division that used to be typified in your flesh was destroyed, was torn down in his own flesh through his offering. And now there's no longer two distinct peoples, but one people in Christ. Pretty magnificent, isn't it? So that division is gone in Christ. Not because of the flesh of the believers, but because the division was destroyed in the flesh of Jesus. Great stuff. I want to leave you with some recommended reading. I'm going to put this up on the screen, and I'm going to leave it up. You may want to pause and write this down. I'm going to leave it up a little longer than I normally would. But take a look at Romans chapter 2, verses 25 through 29, and Colossians chapter 2, verses 11 through 15, and you'll get to see Paul, pardon the pun, but flesh out this concept of how the distinction that was so narrowly boiled down to a division in the flesh is done away with in Christ. He really spells this out, this very concrete and concise, again, pardon the pun, concise description of the differences and how they're done away with in Christ. It's pretty magnificent stuff. I think you'll enjoy it if you go back and take a look at that outside reading. So our words of the week this week: paratome, circumcision; akrobustia, uncircumcision, literally foreskin. What once was a concrete distinction between most people in the world is done away with in Christ, according to Paul, who uses the term akrobustia 19 out of 20 times in the New Testament. Hope that was good for you. And until next time, Charis Kai Reine Humin, grace and peace to you.